So we're starting the corporate side. It was really interesting to hear about the startup part, so I think it got us started and in the mood. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Dianne Baunbaek, and I'm an INSEAD Healthcare from 2019. I am working actually as a precision medicine lead at J&J as an associate director. So I'm not working in this space, but I'm very passionate about what's going on here, and we all should take our part. So I'm surrounded by two beautiful women. So first, I'd like to introduce to you Katja Lundell. She works at Oriola, a leading health and pharma services company that plays a role in ensuring access to women's health products. And Katja is particularly focused on clinical representation, an area where women have historically been underrepresented in research and drug development. So hi, Katja.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm so excited.
Me too. And on my other side, I have Beatrice Lemberg, who leads Hologic's efforts in addressing abnormal uterine bleeding and heavy menstrual bleeding, areas that have been historically overlooked. Hologic specializes in minimally invasive solutions to preserve women's health and change outdated treatment approaches. We're going to hear more about that soon. And she's been instrumental in driving awareness, changing medical incentives, and challenging traditional thinking about hysterectomy as a default treatment. So first of all, I would love to hear how you guys got into this field. Perhaps I can start with Katja.
Yeah, I started my journey in women's health. It's more than 15 years ago now. And even though I think we sometimes feel a bit discouraged, I can tell you it's a very different playing field today than it was post the Women's Health Initiative that came out in 2002, especially from a larger corporate side. It really killed the interest in women's health for nearly 2 decades. So, and I think the previous speakers were referring to that it's been coming back up in the last 5 years. But I think it's been a great journey for me to see this sort of pendulum that is slowly starting to shift. And I think even though I don't work specifically in women's health today, it's still always going to be a passion, and I'm really flying the flag and trying to bring more attention to it.
And Beatrice?
Yes, so well, I've been working in the medtech industry for now over 25 years, and I used to work for J&J like you, Dianne. And then I was approached by Hologic, and the purpose that Hologic has is, to improve women's health, and having a medtech company solely focused on improving women's health was very inspiring for me. So I think that was, I'm a passionate marketeer, and be able to, understand patient need, customer needs, develop the right innovation, drive market access, ultimately to improve women's health, really inspired me. And since I've joined Hologic 9 years ago, there's never been a dull moment, and there's so many opportunities. I think the two panelists before just spoke about it. There's so much that can be done, and I think it's great to see how we can join forces, ultimately, to improve the outcome for women's health.
Yeah, for sure. So, Katja, you were talking about not only women's health, but women representation. Could you talk about how is the women representation in clinical trials in general?
Yeah, I think we have to go back a little bit back in history, because there are historic reasons that are driving this underrepresentation, because we all know that women are underrepresented still in clinical trials today. And I think the big shift came from the 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗁𝗲𝗿 tragedy in the 50s and 60s, where a drug intended for morning sickness caused birth defects. And I think that led to, in 1977, FDA excluding women of childbearing age completely to be included in clinical trials, irrespective of their pregnancy status or wishes. But that, of course, had a huge impact, and that wasn't lifted until 1995. So if you look at the medicines used today, a lot of them were discovered during that period, and there was no women in those studies. And it wasn't until as late as it's 10 years ago, a little bit over, since 2014, when the FDA gave guidance on sex differences and encouraging companies to look at the differences of men and women in clinical trials and to analyze the sex-based differences in both in metabolic, in efficacy, and as well as side effects. So if we think of the history of modern medicine, we're only 10 years in really in clinical trials to being encouraged to look for those differences. And we still don't really understand women's biology in a lot of studies. And we've kind of always assumed that women are mini men. And we know that's not true, but we don't fully understand the impact on, are you on your period? Are you not? At what stages are you of your period cycle in various stages, and what impact that has potentially on side effects or metabolism? So there's a lot to be done, but I think we have to remember that it's historic reasons that really have been driving this. And now, of course, encouraging more and more women into that. And then also try to keep in mind is like, we need to look into more the hormonal variability and how we can take those cycles into account when we look for clinical trial results as well.
That's very interesting. Changing tracks, Beatrice, many women, they don't realize what they experience is normal. They just tolerate the heavy bleeding for years. How can we increase the awareness and the change of the mindset?
Yeah, so just to give some stats, 1 in 5 women in her, let's say reproductive age can be affected by heavy menstrual bleeding. So it's a lot of women. And what's even more mind-blowing is to know that over 50% of them don't seek medical help. They continue to suffer in silence because obviously it's a taboo topic. You don't necessarily like to talk about your heavy bleeding. Maybe their mother, their grandmother, someone in their family had it. So they just think like, well, I have to cope with it. And it's also because when they go to finally seek medical help at a primary care physician or a gynecologist, depending on the country where they are based, many of those physicians are not very familiar with the condition themselves. And so they don't know also how to address that. So I think there's multiple layers that we need to address. First, obviously, it starts with public awareness. The female themselves, the woman themselves needs to understand that it's not normal to bleed heavily. And what do we mean by heavy bleeding? And, it's not normal, to suffer in silence like that. There are solutions depending on your stage of life. Are you done with childbearing or not? And, what are some of those solutions? So it's really about, social media, brochures, material that we can, leave at GP offices or gynae offices and make sure that women can find, and be educated. It's also making sure that we are inclusive and non-judgmental because, there's a language also, and we need to make sure there's also a cultural barrier. We know that for some culture, it's important to continue to bleed. So there's some of those elements also that need to be taken into account. So that's on the patient side. But then there's a lot also that needs to be done on the healthcare physician side, because as I said, primary care physicians are often not familiar with the condition themselves, and therefore they're not sure how to best advise and direct the patient to the right OBGYN that then can, propose a number of solutions. It's about also healthcare policies. It's about lobbying at the right level with policymakers just to make sure that there's a recognition for the condition and make sure that it's covered, it's reimbursed, and obviously that the treatments are available and affordable. And, we need to continue to do research. I mean, we know that 1 in 5, in some countries, they're even claiming 1 in 4. So we need to make sure that we understand more and get research and data so that we can ultimately inform policymakers, providers, and the general public about this condition. I mean, we talked about endometriosis. 1 in 10 women affected by endometriosis, and the cost of it is just among us. And there's no truly, a good treatment for it. So it's another example. But even menopause, I mean, there's so many areas that you can look into above and beyond heavy menstrual bleeding that are poorly understood and that impede the quality of life of women every day.
So true. And I think also the startup track they talked about, also the taboos around it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it starts with us as well, having the discussion, being brave.
Indeed. Completely agree, Dianne.
Katja, is there a perception that focusing on women's health is risky or less profitable? How do you see the investment landscape moving and evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was mentioned before, like it's kind of crazy to think that women represent 51% of the world population, but women's health is a niche, kind of a big niche, but it's almost like a sports analog. We talk about football and then we talk about women's football. So we kind of niche ourselves often into this where we don't want to get into the area of something that is seen as women. So it's a chicken and egg, but there are also real hurdles that we talk about, not just the taboos, but also from a corporate perspective. There are a number of issues that are fundamentally difficult to get through. Like Beatrice mentioned, we don't even have proper prevalence data because women are not being diagnosed. And also some of the costs are, it's not a societal cost, it's the women who pay. You pay for your pads. You don't necessarily call in sick to work and explain exactly why you have to stay because you're bleeding so much. So there's a lot of that's not really in the data, and therefore it also makes it really risky for some companies if you can't use robust data to try to find the area that you want to do your research in. And one area is in pricing, because we can't forget that that's kind of the end result of a lot of this research. When there is no real treatment alternatives, it's hard to get into that market access side of things and showcasing the pricing. And also if the cost is not seen by the system and in healthcare, you can't really reference that. And then it becomes really difficult to get new innovations through and look at what would a cost for those be. So there are a number of things that are issues in that field from a corporate perspective as well, and where it's then becomes seen as less profitable or more risky. And it's not because people are mean or don't want to, but I think it's just a lack of data sometimes that it's hard to get through those hurdles at a corporate level as well.
That's so interesting. But there is that lack of data, but that leads perfectly to my second question to Beatrice, because you helped successfully change the reimbursement policy in Germany. So there must have been some data to convince them. What lessons can be applied to other markets that you learned?
Yeah, so indeed, the healthcare system in Germany is quite complex with the GBA. But to build on what Katja was saying, it starts with data. By showing them the wealth of clinical data that we had for our technology, in that case it's 𝗪𝗲𝘁𝗲𝗿, and showing them the health economics benefit of it, the patient outcome, we were able, to crack the code and to finally get reimbursement in the outpatient setting for this technology. It was also about involving the right stakeholders, because again, it's quite a complex system in Germany. So you need to understand who do you reach out, partnering with the right policymakers, but also obviously the healthcare professional, the patient association also, because ultimately they are the ones suffering. Ultimately was also important for that. Communicating clearly with them as to, not only the data that we have, but throughout the process. And then obviously being highly involved in the design of the reimbursement, setting up the right pricing. And honestly, we continuously evolve and look at, yes, we have a reimbursement today, but we know that we probably need also some additional guidelines. We need to continue to educate the healthcare professionals to adopt the technology. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And at the moment, we even, driving awareness through the primary care physician, the gynecologists themselves in Germany, to make sure that they refer patients faster to the OBGYN. And that's something also that now, we explain when we are at international congresses, we explain to other countries, because we want to inspire other countries to drive the reimbursement. So for example, in Belgium, we don't have, quite a developed country, we don't have reimbursement for NovaSure. So how can we also tease them and showing them, hey, finally we have that, and how can we accelerate also the reimbursement based on the success that we had in Germany? But it's a continuous journey. For every new technology that you bring in, you need to fight to make sure that you explain the benefit that you drive versus the existing traditional methods.
That's great. At least there's a precedence, right? The more that's spreading, the more precedence there is.
Indeed, indeed. And now the German women can benefit from the right technology.
Exactly. Yeah. Katja, we were talking about the underrepresentation of women in clinical trials in general. Could you provide some examples of that?
Yeah, I think there are historic reasons, but I think if we look at conditions in general that are predominantly female, you see that that's where the gap really comes in, and that's it's women's health conditions, but also in areas like autoimmune disease that has a nearly 80% prevalence in women. It's so under-researched today. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done, and we should really be looking into. But I think also in just there's been quite interesting studies when you really dig into this and see, like, I would have really liked to be a fly on the wall to hear the conversations that has happened in some companies when they've looked at, are we going to go ahead with the study or not? I've found out, for instance, that Viagra had an early clinical study done on period pain, where the administration was vaginally, and it actually showed quite promising results. But for some reason, that study never went ahead. So I think that would be really interesting to hear. How would they design that study going forward? And how do you then cost it out? And how do you look at the benefit? Another example of existing drugs where I think pricing is it's a hindrance to the clinical program to be set up at the end is testosterone for women, which is now a bit of a hot topic in the space of menopausal care, because we all know that women also have testosterone, and the lack of that has a huge impact on women's energy, on their muscle mass, on memory loss, etc. But it's one of those things that we don't, for some reason, want to really go close to. We can't agree on the endpoints that we should measure. How do we measure them on women? But also then ultimately price, it comes down to pricing, because testosterone at the moment, it's not very expensive, whereas the male dosing is 10 times higher than the potential female's dosing. How do you get to a space where you would actually then be reimbursed for all that cost and setting up those clinical trials? It would be incredibly difficult, whereas we know there is a massive need that is used off-label everywhere, but there's very few companies that are looking into this area because of the high cost of the clinical study versus what you can expect to gain out from those type of studies. So I think there are a lot of reasons behind it and some of the challenges going forward, but we can also, I think it's also the lack of females in senior leadership of companies. Unfortunately, still today, if you look at just the global healthcare and social welfare as an industry, the workforce is more than 70% women and less than 20% in senior leadership. So I think it's that raising the awareness and then also being proud a little bit of flying the flag, and also asking the questions when we sit in various companies, even though the company has nothing to do with women's health. But if we are in any shape or form part of discussing clinical trials, I think trying to remember and ask the question, how do we take into account female representation here? Do we allow for that? At least raising the question will make a lot of people think. So I think it's that catch-up effect that we hope that if you kind of shake the bottle enough, it will have a ripple effect, and we'll see more results in that.
Yeah, that's so insightful. And for the people that are watching and listening, you heard about the testosterone market gap. So,
yeah.
And also it didn't escape me that you said it was a hot topic in menopause. I thought that was kind of fun.
It really is. There's a lot of discussions around what would the appropriate dose, is it appropriate, when is it appropriate, and how to measure the outcomes of that. So
Yeah.
Menopause is so poorly researched. There's really a lack of understanding for symptoms and how to get them addressed. It's one also of those taboo, and with an aging population, obviously, a huge opportunity for us to better understand. But it's definitely, I think, you talked also about understanding the effect of medication with hormones, and that's clear. During menopause, your entire hormone system changed completely. So, and there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think there's, again, a lot of us who have girls, we talk about more and more about the impacts of women's health issues on girls. We talk about teenage years, but I think very few of us who are kind of menopause age or perimenopause ourselves ever had the conversation with our mothers. We don't recognize the symptoms. The amount of my female friends who come to me, and when you talk about, for instance, brain fog at the age of 45, so many of them who say like, oh my God, I thought I had early onset of Alzheimer's. I had no idea that that has to do with lack of estrogen. So I think we have also, all of us have a little bit of a responsibility to talk about it and not kind of shy away from that topic, to bring those symptoms to more public knowledge.
Exactly. We already almost hit time. That went super fast. Are there any last things that we missed, Beatrice? Is there something that you?
No, I think I'm so glad that we have such a forum where we can exchange, and, build on one another's experience. I was really inspired also by the first speakers and how those young women are, trying to drive change with their startup. And no, I'm super excited, and hopefully, in the Q&A session, we can continue to address some of the questions that some of the participants might have. So no, thank you, Diana and Katja.
Oh, thanks. And Katja, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I think I really want to echo Beatrice. I think this has been a wonderful hour. And having been a little bit sidelined from women's health for 6 months now, I have to say, I feel like invigorated with passion again to really ask the questions and spread the word. And I'm so happy to see that there are younger women coming up as CEOs, driving their own companies, really driving for change. And that does encourage me that even though it doesn't always feel like it's an easy area, but there is development. And if we're kind of loud and proud, we can only go forward with this topic.
So true. Thank you very much, Katja. Thank you very much, Beatrice. I feel like we need a sequel, like we only scratched the surface.